Good evening and welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Adam Jasser. What was unthinkable a few months ago is suddenly becoming a reality. And I'm not talking about events in Washington. I'm talking about good old Europe. European nations this week took individual and collective action to pump billions into their defense industries. On the record, this is great news for Poland. Off the record, the story is that Warsaw has for years failed to scale up its arms production. In just a moment, I will talk about it with Jakub Jaworowski, Polish cabinet minister supervising state-controlled arms producers. But first, a report.
As Donald Trump himself acknowledged, Poland has been an exemplary NATO ally, spending more than double the alliance's 2% of GDP target on defense.
I'm very committed to Poland. I think Poland has really stepped up and done a great job for NATO. As you know, they paid more than they had to. They are one of the finest groups of people I've ever known. I'm very committed to Poland.
In 2024, Poland allocated just over 4% of GDP, or 37.6 billion euro to defense, comparable to the budgets of Italy and Canada. More than half of this spending went toward arms procurement. Yet 70% of contracts flowed abroad, financing American helicopters, South Korean tanks, and European missile systems. To reverse this trend, Poland is aiming to revive its domestic arms industry. At the heart of this effort is the Polish Armaments Group, PGZ, a state-controlled holding company that brings together nearly 70 manufacturers. PGZ produces everything from armored vehicles and artillery to missiles and small arms. It has developed several well-regarded products, including the Piorun man-portable air defense system, the Rosomak armored personal carrier, and the Krab self-propelled howitzer. However, after years of mismanagement, PGZ lacks the capacity to produce these weapons at a scale that meets domestic and foreign demand. In 2024, the group reported revenues of just 3.1 billion euro, a fraction of the nearly 20 billion euro Poland spent on arms that year. Despite its strategic role, PGZ has been plagued by instability. Between 2015 and 2024, the company saw 10 different CEOs, a level of turnover that has led to delays in key projects. The Borsuk infantry fighting vehicle is still awaiting mass production, while the Krab howitzer program has faced repeated bottlenecks. PGZ has also struggled to tap into European funding. It secured just 2.1 million euro from the EU's 500 million euro initiative to boost ammunition production. Poland currently manufactures around 50,000 rounds of 155mm shells annually, roughly what Ukraine's army expends in less than 2 weeks on the battlefield. By contrast, the Czech Republic, despite being a much smaller country, produces nearly 3 times as many artillery shells and has successfully integrated into Western defense markets. The Polish government now expects PGZ to deliver. After years of missed opportunities, the company is under growing pressure to get its act together.
The key goal is to have fulfilled and started ramping up the production of the big calibers of ammunition, the ammunition not only for howitzers but for mortars and tanks as well. Having the production of the new tank for Polish army.
As Europe's top defense firms grow and secure increasing military budgets, Poland is also ramping up spending while the EU plans large-scale investments. Will its embattled defense companies join the rally or be left behind in an increasingly competitive market?
Minister, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Happy to be here.
So it seems it finally isn't a money problem anymore. When it comes to the defense industry, but there's just a small challenge of delivering now, and it seems all eyes are on you.
Are they? In terms of arms production, we are quickly ramping up production in terms of many assets that were mentioned in your material. I think the Krab howitzers, the Borsuk fighting vehicles, which I'm pretty sure the deal to produce them on a mass scale will be signed very quickly. And then there is obviously Rosomak vehicles for infantry. These are all produced on a roughly, we can also say that it's a mass scale.
Right, so what are the key challenges when it comes to this arms group that is under your control that has been troubled for many, many years?
I think for many, many years it was a question of money, right? And because if we look at the military spending, the times of increased military spending are quite recent. It's not been always like this, right? So I think first money, but once you secure money, there is a certain delay for ramping up production, right? Because the production capacity was just not there, right? So it's been taking some time for PGZ to produce these military systems, right?
Right. So to deal with money first, if you take everything into account, the national budget and now the European funds, where do you see the big number in the, let's say, next 2-3 years? How much money will Polish arms industry have at its disposal?
So I think these are at least 2 or 3 different numbers, right? The government is committed to keep up the pace of funding the military. We are now at 4.7% of GDP, and this is...
But only half of it is, or even less, is spent on actual arms, right?
Yeah, of course, but then it is the overall pot of money that we can sort of allocate to arms spending. Then there is the question of, and it's still an open debate, how much money we'll be able to allocate thanks to Rearm Europe programs, right? The European Commission has proposed to boost spending by 800 billion euros, but as we all know, there are very different types of money, so to speak, because some of it is just allowing EU countries to spend more and be troubled less by EU rules on deficit, right? So this is one of the things that Poland is very happy about, because in a sense we were penalized for having such high military spending by a threat of excessive deficit procedure. This is number one. Number two, there's going to be 150 billion, this is what the Commission is proposing, in loans. This should probably also go in some share to the Polish arms industry. And so I think these are the numbers that we are sort of looking at in terms of military spending.
Again, I would like to differentiate between military spending overall and spending on arms production in Poland. So are we talking about tens of billions euros, or are we talking about hundreds of millions euros?
Look, ultimately,
in the next 2-3 years, let's say.
I think it's tens of billions, right? But it's ultimately also a decision that we need to take together with the Ministry of Defense, right? Because ultimately, the main objective here is to ensure that the Polish army has the right equipment, right? And it's obvious that not every piece of equipment the Polish industry is ready to supply the army, right? So we need to take a very educated decision in terms of what we want to produce in the country and what is more practical to import, or to import first and then transfer the technology and transfer the production into the country, right? So ultimately, the starting point will be always the military, and then the secondary objective is to develop the industry in the country. But because of the geopolitical situation, we cannot afford, to build up industry first and then wait for the military capabilities to be built up second. We need the military capabilities now.
But you know how it is with generals, with all respect. They want the best toys. They don't want to settle for second best toys. So how are you going to convince the generals that what the Polish armaments group produces is good enough quality? I mean, the French buy French, the British mostly buy British, and so on and so forth.
Well, I'm not so sure if the British buy mostly British and the French buy mostly French, right? If you look at the equipment of European armies, there is quite a lot of equipment that comes out from outside Europe. But I take your general point. I think also in your material you highlighted a number of items that PGZ is producing very, very well and that have even export potential. But again, if I go back to my point, before we decide to export anything, we need to ensure that the army has enough of whatever product we are talking about, right? So again, self-propelled howitzers. This is the so to speak, a star of the Russo-Ukrainian war, right? Then the man-pad anti-aircraft rockets, the Thunderbolt, the Piorun, right? So there is a number of products which have already proven themselves on the battlefield, and the army is very keen to have more of these.
All right. To sum up this fragment, correct me if I'm wrong, but at the moment Poland spends about 20 billion euros annually on defense procurement.
Yeah, roughly.
And only some 10% of that goes to Polish companies, private and No, more?
No, I think it's more, right? I think even in your material, you rightly said that that the revenues of PGZ were somewhere in the region of 3 billion euros. So it's more.
But they export some. Never mind. Let's say it's upward of 10%. What is your goal in, let's say, 5 years' time? Where should this number be?
Look, I think it's not about where this number should be. It's about making sure that the military has the right equipment. So it will depend on the military where is this money allocated. So we are there to serve them. But having said that, I think as we saw in the material from the vice president of PGZ, I think the key priority is now the large caliber ammunition production, right? This is the Achilles heel of all European militaries and even the US military. If you look at the numbers, towards the end of the Cold War, I think the US produced something in the region of 3 million shells a year. When Russia started its aggression on Ukraine in 2022, I think it was down to around 800,000, right? So there's been a certain peace rent, or for the lack of a better phrase.
I understand that.
So we are now building up this capacity, and I think the ambition is to be able to produce around 200,000 shells in 3 years' time.
Right, and that's doable.
Yes, it's perfectly doable.
So again, going back, just can you give us an approximate share of that defense spend on arms?
No, I can't, and let me tell you why. Because in the peak of at the beginning of the Russian aggression in Ukraine in 2022, the prices of armament have skyrocketed, right? So the same shell that used to cost 5,000 euros, at the moment's notice, started to cost 8,000 euros. Right?
But that's good for the companies. They will be making more money.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is that the moment we are trying to build up capacity, the prices will have fallen, right? But what I'm trying to convince you is the thinking. Our thinking is that we need to supply as much as possible to the Polish military, right? I know. From my perspective as the person who oversees the company, we want to make sure that the company thrives. But at the same time, we know that in the current geopolitical situation, the priority is to secure the military capabilities for the military.
Okay. So one issue, apart from access to finance, which often pops up in discussions about the European arms sector, is the fragmentation of the industry in Europe. So what is your position or the government's position on this? Should Polish state-controlled firms be part of some European consolidation?
So definitely we would like to cooperate more with European companies. And as of now, in some aspects, we are already parts of supply chains, right? One of the companies that are overseen by PGZ is a very well-known TNT and explosives producer. So they supply throughout the world. And also to the United States, right? So in a sense that it's already happening, but at this very point, in some aspects of production, for example, large caliber munitions, we want to localize as much production as possible, right? As it is now, large parts of the production happens in Poland, but some things need to be important. So the objective now is to localize it. So we need to, again, and we need to balance it with the needs of the military and the security needs, simply put, right?
Right. But on the other hand, you know, you're saying cooperation. Cooperation is a word that, you know, comes easily to mind. But, you know, some of these companies exchange shares, or they form consortia, or they become part of a single group. So is Poland planning to perhaps join any of the big arms-producing consortia that exist already in Europe, such as Airbus?
Airbus is a very particular company in which, as you probably know, France and Germany have each around 10% and Spain has 4%, right? And there's been ongoing discussions about whether or not Poland should become the fourth country involved in the company. Once the UK was in the consortium, but we need to remember that it's a big decision involving a large sums of money. the total value of Airbus is around 120 billion euros, right? So if Poland were to join Airbus and somehow acquire 4% of the company, we are talking about 5 to 6 billion euros, which is a substantial sum of money. So this would need to be not only preceded by certain analysis, but we would need to establish with Airbus what kind of military systems would we be developing together, and then again weigh it against the other possibilities of acquiring these military systems, right? So again, in today's situation, what takes absolute priority is getting the right equipment to the army, and then only we can think about, okay, so what's the best way to develop economically?
Right. And what is the role of the private sector in all this? Because there are some promising private sector companies, and there is some concern that the state-owned company will basically squeeze them out of the market and procurement in Poland.
So first of all, those companies are already active in the sector. Yesterday, we organized with PGZ a special forum, a conference, aimed at dialogue with the private companies that are active in the sector, right? And there is, just to give you one example, one company, the one that incidentally produces the Krab self-propelled howitzer, cooperates with 500 private companies that supply various parts of
500?
With 500
Not
companies.
too many?
Why would you say that? I mean, so then this cooperation is already happening, but precisely because we believe there is more room for private sector to take part in this, we organized this forum for better understanding and to see where we can cooperate better with them. Obviously, there is not so many large companies active in this sector, but we also need to remember that some companies can either easily switch or produce products which are of dual use, as they say. So.
Right. Okay, well, let me ask you this question. This week saw share prices of a number of European arms producers skyrocket, 40%, 15%, and they've been going up and up, which of course raises their valuation and makes it easier for them to borrow money to grow further. Did you feel like a ping of jealousy that PGZ is not listed on the stock exchange and therefore couldn't take part in this rally?
Look, I definitely felt the ping that we didn't take part in the rally in the sense that we didn't grow our value in a moment's notice. But yes, actually, it's an interesting concept. If you look at Germany, they don't have any state-controlled or state-owned companies, right? But I think in our current situation, we are not thinking about privatization of any of those companies.
And I'm not talking about privatization, but being listed on the stock exchange. You don't have to be private completely. You can still have a controlling stake, but you can list shares, and that also disciplines the management from time to time, doesn't it?
I'd like to think that the current situation and our oversight of the company, mobilizes the management enough. So I wouldn't put it as a main objective of being listed. But I think at this stage, it's quite crucial for us to have a very good and full control of the company.
Right. So the example of the Czechs and the Slovaks who have privatized their industries, and these companies are actually doing quite well, exporting and contributing to economic growth as well, is not entirely convincing to you at this
Not
stage.
really.
Okay. And you don't want to elaborate on the reasons for that?
No, I think we are determined to have full control of the companies, right? Okay. So I think this is the priority for us.
Right. Okay. Well, last point I wanted to raise with you is some analysts, such as Elizabeth Brough of the Atlantic Council, are arguing that the recent moves by the Trump administration to limit the use of arms purchased from Americans by its allies, by US allies, could mean that Buy European replaces Buy American as some kind of insurance policy for US allies in Europe. What's your view on this?
Look, I think we are already seeing this in very practical terms, because now that the European Union is developing programs for supporting joint procurement and joint European projects in the defense industry, there are some rules that are being proposed that only those arms systems which are produced in Europe, or mostly in Europe, because we all know these are value chains which are quite sophisticated, can benefit from these systems. So I think there is already a certain push in this direction. So there is going to be value in projects which are developed together with European companies, right? And definitely we are looking into this. because in many projects we will need to buy licenses for producing certain parts of certain systems. And so this will become a factor. But ultimately, again, what systems are being bought needs to best serve the military. And they are the ones who decide where to buy and what to buy, because it ultimately needs to serve their purposes.
Right, but we're hearing already reports that the Finns and some other US allies in Europe are thinking of perhaps not concluding some of the contracts because they're simply afraid that the Americans will switch them off remotely or not provide software updates or whatever. I mean, this has been a rather difficult 2 weeks for the Europeans when it comes to reliance on the United States, also in this military aspect.
I mean, is there a question there?
There is a question. Is Poland concerned about that?
I think this is a question that would be best answered by our generals in the military, right? They are the ones who use the systems, and including the American systems, right?
Okay. Finally, the European Commission, as you mentioned, proposed this huge fund that they want to spend on European defense industry. But it seems not everyone in Europe is happy, particularly those countries that already have big defense industries. So where is Poland sitting in this discussion? Do you welcome this initiative of the Commission, or are you a little bit suspicious, just like the French, for example?
Frankly speaking, I don't know the rationale behind the French concerns, but we welcome all the initiatives that aim at boosting Europe's capacity to defend itself, right? So I think in my mind, it's a move in the right direction, and everything that makes Europe stronger makes us stronger. So ultimately, I think we should support it.
So how much time are you giving yourself to get the Polish arms industry under your control to really be the pride of Poland?
I think we can be already proud of what we are producing. I think it's a matter of scale, which takes time, but I think we already see that this is happening, right? So I think within the next year, we will see a lot of contracts signed, a lot of equipment already delivered to the Polish military, and I think this transfer from increasing the funds to putting the actual equipment in the hands of the military will be better seen in like 6 or 12 months.
Right, 6 to 12 months, right? Okay, can you tell us in terms of sales numbers? So you expect, let's say, what is the plan for the Polish arms group to grow from the current level of sales to, let's say, in 3 years' time? Where would you like them to be?
So I think the PGZ strategy is still in the making. So I would leave it to the management to declare those numbers. But definitely we see the PGZ growing very, very fast.
All right. Minister, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Today. This is all we've got for you today. This was On the Record. See you next week.